session where you will be able to submit questions to us and we'll respond to you. My name is Rob Strauntz. I'm with the Cloudburst Group. I am joined today by a panel of my colleagues at Cloudburst, many of whom you have heard on past webinars or may have worked with through Ask a Question. I'll ask them to just quickly unmute and say hello so you can recognize their voice. Laura Dietert.
Hello, everyone.
Ben Sturm.
Hello, everyone.
Susan Walsh.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
And Joel Warren.
Hey, good morning. Good afternoon for some.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks. Joel and I are out west, so yes, we forget. Good morning and good afternoon. And of course, thanks to those working behind the scenes, including our registrar and host, Nikki Dieninger. And Gloria, have you joined us from HUD?
Yes.
Oh, hi, Gloria. Welcome. Thanks, Gloria. Gloria, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It took a while. I don't know what was going on with the computer, but I'm on.
Sure, great. Thanks for joining us. So before we get started, a few things regarding today's session. It is scheduled for 1 hour. However, it could run a little bit longer, but we're just talking about it. We think we're going to be right at an hour. We'll have plenty of time for questions. If you do need to step away for some reason, please remember that the session will be recorded. The slides, the transcript, and recording will all be posted on the HUD Exchange, usually within 2 or 3 weeks of the session, if not sooner. Again, we'll have time to take your questions today. All questions will be handled through the WebEx Q&A pod. So by default, this pod is hidden in the WebEx app. So take a minute to find the WebEx control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. Locate and click on the Q&A pod up in the top right corner. You click on that and it will become visible and accessible to you. Same with the chat pod. You can turn that on and off if you need to communicate with the host. But please focus on the presentation and minimize conversation in the chat pod. But please use the Q&A for us to be able to receive your questions, which we'll grab those as we're going along. So go ahead and make those. We'll grab those and we'll answer them at the end. Also remember, if we can't get to your question today, you can submit a question through Ask a Question on the HUD Exchange. Note that all participants are muted by default. If you need help with WebEx or have other technical issues, please chat at the host. We'll be able to help you. Last, if you would like to change your audio settings from phone to computer, go back to the Quick Start menu at the top left of the screen. Go to Audio Conference and switch your selection from phone to computer or vice versa. And again, thank you very much for HUD CPD for making this webinar possible today. So by the end of the webinar, we hope everyone will be able to answer the following about the CAPER. How do I create the CAPER template? Where does the pre-populated data in the CAPER come from? How do I utilize reports as a validation tool alongside the CAPER? So we'll talk a little about reports. And last but not least, how do I submit the CAPER in IDIS? So Joel, can you tell us a little bit about the material we'll be covering today?
Yeah, Rob, you bet. So as some may recall, in July, we covered those things that you should be doing before you make the CAPER. So today we'll cover a few of the same topics. To reiterate those, then we'll get into a bit more detail about the data of the CAPER, some relevant reports, and then finally submitting. So first, to talk about how to create the template for any folks who may be working on their first CAPER of the year. It'll be a refresher for others. Then we'll get into some screens, specifically talking about where the data comes from. As you work to make some edits and adjustments in the CAPER, you get a sense of where that pre-populated data comes from. Then we'll have Susan Walsh join in, who some of you may know, and she'll cover some specific reports and how that's helpful to you as you work in the CAPER. Then we'll cover some ESG screens, talking about the requirements there and the SAGE report. And towards the end, we'll go over how to technically submit the CAPER, some of those common troubleshooting steps. And at the very end, we'll do the Q&A.
Great, thanks. And feel free to submit questions as the webinar is running. Again, we'll grab those and answer those at the end of the webinar. So yes, our first section here will be on creating the CAPER. So quick review, Joel. What is a CAPER and who needs to complete it?
So I'm sure we've lost some people daydreaming about capers and bagels and lox in New York City, but the CAPER we're talking about today is the Consolidated Annual Performance and Evaluation Report. And its purpose is to report and assess the progress made towards achieving those goals that you outlined in both your con plan and your action plan. It records different types of data, such as progress towards goals versus outcomes, beneficiaries, resources and investments made over a program year, actions taken to address things such as fair and affordable housing, homelessness, and any other specific program data in your action plans. Each grantee is responsible for creating and submitting their own CAPER, and this is important to note, so this includes even those participating members of a home consortia. So both lead and participating members create and submit their own CAPERs. And a caveat there at the bottom, so usually the CAPER is due to HUD every 90 days after your program year. However, in light of the pandemic, HUD's extended that deadline to 180 days after your program year. That means if your 2019 CAPER is now due 180 days after your 19 program year ends.
Great, thanks, Joel. So remember that's after your program year, because not everyone has the same program year. A lot end June 30, meaning your CAPER is due today. But many have our calendar year or follow the federal fiscal year, so it may be different. But again, look at that waiver, that notice there, that extends another 90 days. So it's a total 180 days after the end of the CAPER, at the end of your program year. Okay, so next, oh, my slides are moving kind of slow today. What does a grantee need to do to create their CAPER, Joel? Where do they start?
Yeah, so from the very beginning. So as you log into IDIS, on that left-hand side, you'll see that add link under the orange CAPER menu. When you click add, you'll get the menu that you're seeing here as a screenshot. You'll see the program year, which you'll input as your action plan year. You'll see a title that you want to give to your CAPER, and you'll make that version ID, which is a unique identifier. So typically, the jurisdiction name with the word CAPER in a program year is your title or something similar. The version ID is most typically a 1 or 1.0. Something to tell your coworkers who may be helping you, which is the latest version of your ID. Also to note, you can always go back and change your title if you change your mind or something changes. Okay, next slide.
Thank you. All right, so go ahead, Joe, sorry.
Oh, you're fine. So this is a really important piece. So it's important to know which action plan your CAPER is speaking to. So if you don't know that, it might confuse you of where the data is coming from. So on this CR00 administration screen, you can see exactly which action plan your CAPER is connected to. So as the screenshot shows here at the very bottom, you'll see exactly the year, the title, and the plan version.
Okay. So what if we create CAPER in error, or we want to start over with a new version? What do we do?
That's a good question. So once your CAPER is created, it cannot be deleted, and it can't be reassociated to a different action plan. So it's important that grantees take necessary steps to avoid the errors. So first, the CAPER associates with the most recently approved annual action plan. So that means the most recently planned marked as review completed. So the CAPER will not be linked to plans. This is important. So the CAPER cannot be linked to plans that are still in submitted for review, waiting for modifications, or open in progress. So the plan will only be associated to those plans review completed. Yep.
Got it, got it. So we need to be really careful about the correct program year and make sure the action plan for that program year is marked review completed, and that is done by the HUD rep, correct?
Yep, exactly.
Okay, so So if it's not in that state, you need to reach out to your CPD rep and ask them to flip that switch. All right, next.
Yeah, so the basic point of the CAPER, so when you log in and you hit edit on that CAPER, the screens you see here will reflect the programs that you administer. So this example, the screenshot, this grantee administers ESG, CDBG, Home, and HOPWA, as you see from that CR 45 through 55 screens, and those ESG screens too. So you'll only see the screens here that are relevant to you.
All right, thanks, Joel. So now, moving quickly, we're going to the heart of the CAPER, the data. So we know that the CAPER and eCon Planning Suite is set up to meet the reporting requirements for HUD CPD grants. We also know that data we enter at the activity level ends up in the CAPER. So what else does a grantee need to know about that? How does the CAPER put this puzzle together? Where are we going to see the data? And can we fix it if we need to? Sorry, Joel, so many questions today.
Rob, that is. There's a ton of questions. We'll see if we can answer a few. So throughout the CAPER, the pre-populated data can be edited and adjusted. So keep that in mind as you're working. Remember to also use the narrative boxes to support the data you see in those screens. So good example, in that CR05 goals and outcomes screen, that's a really good place to tell the story of how the numbers on that screen actually impact your community and the people you serve. So don't get so caught up in the data where you forget to use the narrative boxes to kind of tell the further story. And the next point there on this slide, so the CAPER reflects the Part 91, which everyone should make themselves familiar with. That's in the Con Plan Desk Guide, which is updated as of today, which is great news. And then you can also see the requirements for each screen of the CAPER in that desk guide. And then the last bit there, so in the CR00 administration screen, that's where you'll be putting your supporting documents such as reports or other appendices that you might want HUD to review. And we'll go into some of those reports a little bit later on. Excellent, thanks. So data throughout the CAPER comes from quite a few different places. So the very first bullet there, the strategic plan and your annual action plan informs all those places where you see the expected column. That number expected usually points directly back to a number that you have either in your con plan or your action plan or both, depending on which screen you're in. Activity accomplishments are pulled into the CAPER. These typically come directly from the accomplishments that you already have in IDIS reported. It's important here to note the difference between CDBG and home. So for CDBG accomplishments, just to reiterate, this has been, if the input has under the correct program year in the accomplishment detail activity, it'll appear even if the activity is still open. This is because CDBG activities can generate beneficiaries over several program years, and the home is a little bit different. So it only counts beneficiaries when the activity is marked as completed.
Oh, that's an important thing to remember.
Yeah, it's a good thing to highlight as you work through your CAPER if some data isn't looking quite exactly right. So then going down to the funding and drawdowns, so CAPER data also comes from the completed drawdowns as you've reported them in IDIS. So the caveat to this is for those ESG grantees, the ESG CAPER is submitted through SAGE, and the SAGE report is attached to the CAPER, which is a little bit different. Then finally, it's important to keep in mind as you work in the CAPER that the CAPER organizes all of your accomplishment data by goal and not by project or activity. So it's really important that you view your activities and projects as they are tied to the goals that you have in both your action plan and your con plan. So if you have all of those goals lined up to your activities, you'll already be off to a really good start as you make your template.
Yes, and that's what we covered on our last webinar on July 29th about setting up those activities and projects correctly, getting those goals and outcome indicators aligned correctly in preparation for creating your CAPER. So if you're having problems there, or if this is new to you, then yeah, please go back and look at or listen to our July 29th webinar, and also consult the materials that we have posted online, including our newly updated Econ Planning Desk Guide. All right. Go back on slide 15. Oh, there we go.
Perfect. Okay, so diving into the screens here finally. So this is the CR05 Goals and Outcomes Table 1. This is where you're reporting your accomplishments for the projects that are associated to a goal for your program year. And program year is the key word there for this table. In this case, if it's a 2019 CAPER, this table is reporting your 2019 accomplishments that are pointing towards those 2019 goals in your annual action plan. So the expected amount is coming from your AP20 goal screen, where you set up that goal initially. The actual amount is coming from your actual reported accomplishments within IDIS. All right, so subtle differences here. So this is Table 2. So whereas Table 1 was looking at accomplishments for the program year, Table 2 is looking at your accomplishments against your 5-year plan. So the expected amount here is coming from your con plan goals, which is your ST45 screen in your con plan. And the actual column here is, just like Table 1, is populating your accomplishments in the system that are reported against that con plan goal.
All right, so Table 1, annual plan, annual accomplishments. Table 2, 5-year plan, progress towards 5-year goals. Okay. Next slide.
Yeah, nailed it. So this is the CR10, racial and ethnic composition table. So this is populating from your accomplishment data within IDIS for the given program year. So again, really similar to how the CR05 populates. Something of importance in this table though, so the table description here states families. However, this is somewhat confusing. So the system is actually reporting on both families and persons, depending on your specific activity in IDIS. So keep this in mind as you work to edit this screen in case the numbers don't look exactly how you'd expect them to when you create your template.
Okay. So yeah, this can be a little confusing. So important to remember that subtle difference.
Excellent. So the CR15, this is your investments and resources screen. While the resources made available column is pulled directly from your AP15 expected resources page, the amount expended column is programmed to add up all the drawdowns completed for a particular program year. So the key to that second column being the word completed drawdowns. Again, like most of these columns, you can edit these numbers and then, again, use the narrative box to explain any adjustments that you're making.
Okay, so in that case, we had 2019 costs, but the voucher wasn't completed in 2019, or you had late draws the prior year that spilled into the current program year. You need to look at this number and likely correct it because it's really often that we've got draws trailing the program year. So definitely remember to take a look at this.
Yeah, in a perfect world, it would populate exactly how you would program it to. But yeah, definitely relook at that column and make sure it reflects your program year. Okay, great. So this is the CR15 geographic distribution table. This will only populate for those grantees that use geographic priorities. I know many don't, so you might see the heading of this column, but you won't see anything for the CDBG home or any of your programs. That, as the screenshot shows here, the first column will populate directly from your AP15 to geographic distribution screen, where you've stated your priorities and the planned percentages of your allocation. And that second column, the actual percentage column, will not populate automatically. You'll need to fill this in automatically. Then that narrative description box, this will populate directly again from your AP50. But if you put a really long description in your AP50, it might not all fit here. So I'd recommend going in here and editing that narrative description.
So a little bit of manual entry on this screen. And yeah, just reinforce that this is only going to be relevant to those who have geographic targeting in the action plan. Others can just ignore it. And as a reminder, geographic targeting is not all of your jurisdiction. It's a sub-area, and your targeting should be supported by data and narratives. If you have any questions about creating a target area, what a target area means, I would suggest you talk to your CPD rep and they can provide you with some guidance. And also there is some guidance in the eCon Planning Suite desk guide. Okay, back to you, Joel.
Right on, thanks. So this is your CR20 screen, which is the affordable housing screen. The very first column here of this table might look familiar. So this is directly pulled from your 1-year goal column that is taken from your annual action plan. And that's the AP 55 affordable housing screen. So this table and that screen talk to each other. We get questions occasionally on what exactly should be included on this screen in the actual column. I always refer people, look back at what you put in your AP 55 and what you stated there, and then use any reports available to you to populate that actual column to reflect what you had in your AP 55.
Okay. And these may be units that you are part of your goals that may not have been produced using CPD funds.
Right.
All right.
Okay, so still on the CR20 screen, this number of households served table, like many others, populates from your accomplishment data in IDIS. So again, we'll reiterate the difference between CDBG and home. So for CDBG, the information has been input under the correct program year, and that accomplishment detail part in the activity that will populate here even if the activity is still open. Whereas with home, this will only populate here if the activity is marked as completed.
Okay, great. Thanks, Joel. A lot of information. Remember, this is recorded. There's always the desk guide and ask a question. We're glad to help you with your particular individual situation. If we can't answer your question today, submit and ask a question. Now we'd like to introduce reports that grantees can use to help review the data that are going into the CAPER, reports that accompany the CAPER, and reports that can even be used to troubleshoot the CAPER to figure out what the heck's going on. Joel, can you walk me through these reports? And also Susan, you'll be joining us as well, correct?
Yeah, I think Susan will walk us through the reports on this slide, and then she'll go into some detail from a few of these too.
Okay, Susan, are you there? You may have lost Susan. Okay. Joel, do you want to walk us through these? Or Susan, you're muted. Well, technical difficulties here. Sorry about this. All right. Well, Joel, you want to talk about the CLON plan goals and accomplishment report?
Yeah. So this is one of the reports that we had in our last webinar. This is really good to run before you make your CAPER. So this report will show you the accomplishments you have in the system as it relates back to your goals, both in your action plan and your con plan. So this report will expose if you have some accomplishments that might not be tied to a goal, or it's tied to several goals and the system is not quite sure exactly where to put it. So again, this is probably one of the better reports to run before you make your template. This will work to inform exactly where you are with your CAPER. I think we have some examples then of these other ones, the PR03.
Yep. Yeah. All right,
great.
PR03.
So this report here, is good to run, again, as you're making your CAPER. This will inform that CR10 screen. in the beneficiaries. So this is the racial and ethnic composition table.
Hi, I'm back.
There you go.
Sorry about that. I was trying to unmute myself in a different part of the app, and it wasn't working. Really sorry about that, everybody.
It's in time.
Oh, no worries.
So I wanted to go over just briefly some of the reports. So if we could go back to that slide that shows the 6 reports, and then I'll talk about each one briefly. Great, thanks. And I think Joe already talked about the content goals and accomplishments report, which is really helpful, but the main drawback about that report is that it doesn't show you the activity. You know, it doesn't tell you by activity number. And so that is problematic if you're trying to drill down to the activity level. And so these other reports listed are very helpful to see more detail by activity. So we have the PRO3 report, and we're going to go over that in more detail in a minute. There's a couple versions of that. Also the PR22 report, we're going to talk about that some more in the next slide. The PR26 financial summary report we'll talk about also a little bit more detail, but you can go back to that list for a minute, Rob. And
sure.
Then the PR28, of course, is the state PER, and that's required for states. So the PR26 and the PR28 are actually the only required reports for the CAPER. The others are more reports that are helpful for you in determining the data that you might need to enter if you need to adjust anything. The PR33 is the home matching liability report, and that, you know, you can run that, and also you can find that also online. But a lot of people do get that confused because it's based on the federal fiscal year. So if you don't know that your matching liability is based on the federal fiscal year, then your reports that you run might not match up with that. So that would be for 19, that would be October 1st of 18 through September 30th of 19 is what HUD looks at for your expenditures to determine what your match liability is for the 2019 CAPER. And then also the PR91 is an ESG financial summary, and there's several versions of that. There's new filters now where you can filter for CV, the CV program, or regular. And even though most of your data is going to be uploaded into Sage, there is some information that's helpful by subrecipient in this PR91 report that you can use for you know, helping with your CAPER. So we can go to the next slide now. So we're going to show you some examples of these different reports. So first we'll look at the PRO3 activity summary. This is a familiar report, I'm sure, to many of you. And this particular version is the regular, just PRO8, and it's best in a PDF, and it's often many, many pages because it gives you pretty much 2 pages for every activity. So this is really a nice report, particularly for your public if you want to give your public information. It's easy to read and easy to look at. And it gives you information about your draws during your program year and when your activity was completed, if that was the case, and then your accomplishments. There's also some other PRO3 reports that are helpful, that are more distilled. And so, for example, we can look at the PRO3 BOSMAC. There's actually several versions of the PRO3 BOSMAC, but we'll just look at the original one. And this report just takes that data and it distills it down into, it's best to download it as an Excel document. And you can sort, filter with that information, but it gets it into a more easier to view format if you're trying to add up numbers or see things at more of a glance. So it goes way across. It just you scroll across, and it has it has a column for every single thing that's in that report. So there's a lot of columns, but so it's not so much good for the public, but it's nice for the for staff to try to figure out your totals.
What the heck does BOSMAC mean anyhow?
Oh, you had to ask me that, Rob. Well,
Okay.
I remember that there was something about Boston involved in it. Maybe you know a little more.
That's all I know is that it was originally it was an Excel macro that ran on the downloaded report that generated this more tabular version of the report. And it was done by someone in the Boston field office who came up with it. So a bit of IDIS lore.
And they will forever live in OSMEC history.
Yep.
So we can move on now, and we can look at the PR22, or actually this is the PR26. Why don't we look at the PR22 next?
Okay.
Yeah, so this is a report that can be helpful for looking at home activities, and particularly for completed activities. And earlier, Joel had mentioned how home doesn't count activities for your CAPER unless they're completed, which is different than CDBG. Now, one thing that's very important to know about this report is that the choices you have when you're running it are to run it for all years or to run it for open activities and activities that were completed in the last year. And so a lot of people think, oh, I'll just do it for the open and completed in the last year. That's one selection. The problem is, unless you run it on the very last day of your program year, which will go back exactly 1 year, you're not going to necessarily get accurate data because it goes back 1 year exactly. So if you're running it today, which is September 30th, but you want it for your program year that ended June 30th, it's only going to go back a year from today, which means it's going to miss out on those first 3 months of your program year last year. So what we recommend is when you run it, the selection to select all years. And that way you can download it into Excel, and then you can filter, and you can do a custom filter, or you can just filter so that you can only see and then change it to completed, and that way you'll see just what you completed in your program year itself. But this is a really nice report that just gives you a lot of information about your activities, and it does group them a little bit differently than maybe you're used to. But again, you can filter and sort the way you want. I want to mention something too about TBRA activities, because we get a lot of questions about that. And TBRA is kind of a different animal when it comes to home activities, because with TBRA, you don't always, not all PJs will complete those activities even every year. Sometimes they leave them open for several years. And the problem with that is if you're looking at completed activities, then you're not going to get credit for those tenants that you assisted during your program year. And so some of the reports, like there's a PR23 report that does show you your TBRA recipients based on the initial funding date of the activity. So if you run a PR23 for home, it will give you the numbers based on your activities during your program year that were initially funded during that program year. But it doesn't base it on completed. If you do it through this report, PR22, then you can see completed. So sometimes with TBRA, it might be good to verify your numbers by looking, if you have an internal tracking system, which is very much recommended for TBRA, you can look and see how many households did you assist during your program year. Now, these would be newly assisted. So if you're doing maybe 24 months of assistance, you're doing 12 months, and then you're renewing it for 12 more months, you don't want to count them twice. But for newly assisted tenants, you do want to make sure that you're getting credit for all those people that you assisted during your program year. And as many PJs that have TBRA activities might be adding new tenants all the time, and that can cross program years. Sometimes the reports don't tell the whole picture. So we really do encourage you, if you're doing TBRA, to look internally at your numbers and really give yourself the credit for what you deserve of who you've assisted during the year. So let's go on to the PR26 report. Now this is the one report that for entitlement grantees you do have to submit with your CAPER. I'm sure everyone knows and loves this report. And it's got a little problem right now since the last release. It's not allowing people to add their 2019 program year in the parameter section. So if you did add your 2019 program year already before the new release that went live on September 14th, then you're lucky and you're going to have no problem. But if you didn't, then we've consulted with headquarters about this, and what they recommend is, for now, if you need to submit now, is to go ahead and run it in your reports. So you can always run the PR26 for the 2019 year, even if you haven't edited parameters, but it's not going to show you, of course, your line 1, which you have to enter yourself, or any adjustments if you happen to have any adjustments. But you can run it in MicroStrategy reports and then download it as an Excel. And that way you can add your line 1, which will, of course, lead to adjustments. You'll need to adjust your line 8 and your line 16. And you can also make other adjustments if you need to and submit it to your field office that way. So if you have to submit it, if you don't have an extension or you have to do it right now, that's the option available to you. We apologize for this, but there was apparently some change that happened in the new release that caused something. The report itself works fine when you run it, but the parameters is the issue, and not being able to add the 2019 year.
So someone can reproduce this, pretty much can reproduce this in Excel, download it, and then make this, put functions, formulas in where there's just numbers right now and make it work. Okay.
Correct, correct. Or just edit the numbers without formulas if you need to. Just make sure that you're doing it correctly and following the way that the report runs properly. And if you have any questions, you can always submit an IDIS Ask a Question.
And there's good guidance on how this report works available.
Right.
And what numbers should go where.
That's right. There's very good instructions in the on the HUD Exchange for the PR26.
Great.
So, yeah, I think that's the most helpful. Of course, there's lots of other reports, but, and, you know, if you have questions, you can submit them right now, and then we can try to talk through anything else you have questions about.
Great. Thanks, Susan. Thank you very much, and Joel. And now on to ESG. ESG is different, as we mentioned before. What do ESG grantees need to know, Joel?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different. There are a couple extra things ESG grantees have to do. So ESG grantees are required to complete that CR60, the subrecipient information screen, as well as that CR70 assistance provided and outcome screen. Within that CR60, it's really important that grantees identify all subrecipients. I know we get some questions about that sometimes. So if you're ESG grantee, make sure in that CR60 screen that you're identifying all of your subrecipients. ESG grantees will leave that CR65, that person's assisted, and that CR75, the expenditure screen, both blank, as those will be reported through the SAGE report that gets uploaded into the CR00 screen. One thing to note, so the system will not tell you that if you're an ESG grantee, the system won't tell you to leave those screens blank. So just be mindful. Again, you're leaving that CR65 and CR75 screen blank. Also on that slide, yeah, perfect. So ESG recipients, you know, as most of you probably already know, you're submitting your accomplishment data in that SAGE HMIS repository. All the quarterly ESG CV reporting will be done through SAGE and not in IDIS. And if there are questions about any of these things on the screen you're seeing now, there's some pretty good resources on HUD Exchange for ESG, and we'll have a slide at the end that lists out those resources and has links to them.
Yep, great. And remember, there are AAQs, Ask a Question desk, for both SAGE and ESG, correct? All right, and the last main topic is submitting this CAPER.
Nice. Well, congrats on making it this far. Making good progress. So once you have all of your data and all your narrative screens completed, that's when you'll head to that CR00 admin screen of your CAPER. So in this screen, you'll see some places to attach things, make sure you're attaching things in PDF form. So once all your attachments are there, this is where you'll go to the very, very bottom, click that drop-down menu, and click Submitted for Review, then click Save and Return. So when you click Save and Return, that's when you've officially submitted your CAPER to HUD, and this CAPER will not be editable at that point in time. If your HUD rep then turns around and says, hey, can you make some changes or some edits to the CAPER, I see some discrepancies, they may return the CAPER to you, and then it will be in a different status, or reviewed and awaiting modifications. If that happens, you can make changes to the CAPER, then you'll resubmit it again through the same process. So going back to the CR00 screen, changing the status back to submitted for review.
All right. So common issues, we know, we work in the AQ and we just know everybody gets this right and it completely makes sense, right? Everyone who's been on this for the first time, this completely makes sense, right? No, it doesn't. So Joel, can you walk us through some of the things that we see often that grantees stumble on or get a little bit confused about?
Absolutely, happy to. So these are the 4 that I found that we get the most questions about. So that very first one, just the most one we've covered a couple times, both in this webinar and the last. Make sure that the action plan you're trying to make a CAPER for is marked as review completed in IDIS. So if it's not marked as review completed, work with your HUD field office to make sure you're resolving any of the issues in that action plan so it can be marked as review completed. Yep, thanks. So number 2 there, it's also really important in your CAPER to make sure that your GOIs are consistent across all of your plans. So this includes projects, activities, action plans, con plans. If you're finding through a report or through your CAPER that you have a different GOI in an action plan than what was chosen for the con plan, you might need to make an amendment to your action plan. Or if you choose not to and you think it's too minor to make an amendment, you'll need to manually adjust that in your CR05 screen. Number 3 there, so again, very, very similar. So the same goes for how projects are matching to your action plan. Make sure that goal outcome indicator you've selected for a project points to the exact same GOI for the goal. Again, when these don't match, you'll probably have to amend either the con plan or the action plan to just make sure that your GOIs line up from con plan to action plan to project. I think we've hammered that one. So the very last one, so when you get some funky errors in the screen, I know this happens sometimes, and it's frustrating. The most common cause for these errors that we've seen are pasting from Word into the CAPER. So when you paste from Word or a different processing document, there are a lot of special characters that get pasted behind the scenes. So make sure you're using that paste from widget. So yeah, Rob's highlighted that, thanks. So that little widget near narrative box, if you click that, it'll open up a box, you paste your narrative in there, then you hit insert, and that'll remove all those special characters. So the limit is 4,000, so keep that in mind as you're going. So if you try to save a screen and you get an error, good practice would be to delete whatever you just added, try and saving it again, and if that saves, you've probably figured out where your error is.
All right, what are some things we must do before we create the CAPER?
Yeah, so we're reiterating here again a couple of things we've already covered. Make sure that annual action plan is marked as review completed. This goes for amendments as well. Ensure your action plan is connected to the right, ensure your action plan and your CAPER are connected in the right way. When you make that CAPER, make sure in the CRO screen that it's associated to the right action plan. Ensure your action plan has all the right projects. And this includes, program year. So if you're in the habit of copying an action plan from one year to the next, you probably know that it keeps those projects in the system. So we'll get a lot of questions sometimes about projects not looking right in the CAPER or accomplishments not reporting exactly right. A good way to go back to that is make sure in your action plan that you have projects for that program year. So if you're copying 18 to 19, you'll need to make sure that you're removing those old projects and making new projects for that program year.
Right, and little grantee hack is to think about how you name your projects, so that if they're common from one year to the next, you'll be able to tell. It'll jump out at you that, oops, that's last year's that got copied in there. So think about how you name your projects.
That's a good tip. Bullet number 4 there. So again, make sure you're entering all of your data in IDIS. You know, I would give it a day. Sometimes the system takes a little bit to refresh. You know, I would put all your data in, maybe the next day come back in and hit that add button. And along similar lines, you know, make sure you're using the reports that are available to you both before you make the CAPER and as you're in the process of making those edits and adjustments. You know, use those reports. And if you have questions, again, like Susan said, feel free to use that IDIS AAQ, and they can help out a lot with that. Okay.
Okay, final warning.
On the home stretch here. So if you've created a CAPER and you see some issues, you don't need to create a new template. Remember, all these screens are editable, so you can manually adjust using the reports, making sure that whatever is in those screens in the CAPER are reflective of your program year. You know, to tell the story both through data and narrative, it's both editable. All right, Rob, that's all I got. Yeah.
All right, on to the resource. Thanks, Joel, on the resources section here. So I mentioned these slides will be made available in about a week or two. Meantime, there are plenty of resources available on the HUD Exchange. Also, remember to sign up for listserv, so you'll get announcements of events like this, and also when program materials are made available, new materials are made available on the HUD Exchange. There are some quick guides available that are focused on specific tasks in addition to other reference guides. As we pointed out, remember, I don't know if we mentioned this, but Appendix B of the Complan Desk Guide is where you're going to find the correct goal outcome indicators for activity types if you need to make sure that they're aligning correctly. And for CDBG, the correct pairing of the matrix code and goal outcome indicator. So those all have to match and align so that they all can move through the CAPER correctly. As we mentioned, you can submit your question to ask a question, have us respond to it. And of course, the past webinars, which we've plugged, are available on the HUD Exchange. So now with over 10 minutes left, we have some time for questions. Questions should be submitted through the Q&A pod. Remember that if you're not seeing it, it's hidden, so click on the Q&A pod up in the right-hand corner to activate it so you can see it. And let's see, we have a lot of questions, so we'll answer as many as you can. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Laura, who's going to read out the questions.
Hey, Rob, this is Ben.
Oh, Ben. Sorry, Ben.
Read them out. Hi, everyone. So starting off, Joel, I think this one's for you. If I'm in a consortium, do I need to wait for the lead grantee to create their CAPER before creating mine? And do we also need to submit our CAPERs at the same time? Two-part question.
This is a good, yeah, gotcha. This is a good question. So it's different than the action plan of the CAPER. Or sorry, the action plan of the con plan. The CAPER is its own thing. So no, you don't need to wait for the lead grantee to create the CAPER if you are a home consortium member. So as a member, you're responsible to both create that CAPER template yourself and also to submit it. So you're not on the same timeline necessarily as the lead entity. So this is different than the con plan and the action plan, where you do have to wait for the lead entity. With the CAPER, you're on your own.
Okay, thank you. Next question is another CAPER setup question, and I can handle this one. Can you delete a CAPER after it's been created in IDIS and start over? Or can you only create a new version? So once a CAPER has been created in IDIS, it cannot be deleted. If something has, the good thing about the CAPER is, as Joel indicated earlier in the presentation, the CAPER is editable. So a lot of the data fields, you can correct or manually update the data if it didn't populate correctly in the system. Or if the CAPER is not associated to the correct plan, or if it was, say, it was created before IDIS activity accomplishments were entered, you can create a new CAPER, though it's recommended that you update the existing CAPER that has been created. And for next question, what are the required reports that must be submitted with the CAPER?
Susan, that's got your name on that.
I guess it does. Well, the only required reports are the PR-26 for entitlement grantees and the PR-28 for state grantees. Those are the only reports that you must send to your field office with your CAPER. Or upload, into the ConPlan suite. You can, of course, have other reports in your public-facing document, or even send to your field office if you'd like, but the PR-26 and PR-28, whether you're entitlement or state, are the only required reports.
Okay, and I'd also just like to add, if you are an ESG recipient, you are required to include the a SAGE PDF download report from the SAGE system for your ESG accomplishments, and that needs to be uploaded with the reports on the CR00 administration screen.
Great, thanks, Ben.
Okay, Susan, this is another question for you. Will the CAPER tell me if we went over any spending caps?
Well, the PR-26 will tell you that. The PR-26 measures not so much, well, it measures the public service caps, which, are waived right now for 19 and 20 funds and for your CV funds. It measures your 20% planning and admin, and it also measures to make sure you've used at least 70% of your funds that year for low mod activities. So that report, the PR-26, is very helpful in making sure you have adhered to those requirements, and that's really the main reason why you need to submit it, so that your HUD field office can see that as well.
Okay, thank you, Susan.
And Susan, if something in there is wrong, we can adjust that, and the guidance tells us how to do that, correct?
That's right. There's adjustment lines on the reports, and there's also a prior year flag option in IDIS where you can mark vouchers as prior year if they were invoices you're paying after your program year ended, but were really attributed to your prior year. And if you mark those as prior year, they will automatically update in your PR-26, and you won't have to make any adjustments. But if you have other types of adjustments, or you can add unliquidated obligations for planning and admin and public services. So those are all adjustment lines that are available to you, and we encourage you to read the instructions to understand how that all works.
Thank you.
Okay, we've received a lot of questions about CDBG-CV and CARES Act and ESG-CV, HOPWA-CV. At this time, we're going to wait until more HUD guidance on how to incorporate accomplishments for CARES Act programs into the CAPER. We're going to wait until more HUD guidance comes out on that, but there is always the description boxes on the accomplishment screen. So if you want to talk about what's going on with your CDBG-CV projects, you can provide an explanation in the narrative boxes in the CAPER. But as far as reporting requirements for CV, we're going to hold off on that until further HUD guidance comes out on that. So Joel, I think this is a good question for you. Our con plan began in 2019. However, we have projects from 2017 and 2018 that were completed this year. How do we report those projects in our 2019 CAPER?
So if you're talking about data specifically, we covered when those accomplishments will be reported in the CAPER. So if it's CDBG, those are reported on, even if it's still open, during the program year. If it's home, the activity has to be closed. If you're speaking more about the narrative section, you're always, if it's a multi-year project, you're always able to describe in narrative form the ongoing accomplishments of that project. Does that answer the question, Ben? Or is that getting somewhere else?
I think you hit it. So if a previous home project from 2017 or 2018 wasn't completed until 2019, then those accomplishments would be reported in the 2019 CAPER. Where with CDBG, the accomplishments would be reported during the program year that those accomplishments occurred. So if a 2017 CDBG project has been open, but no accomplishments were reported until 2019, then those accomplishments would be reported in the 2019 CAPER.
Got it. Yep. So that's like the key difference between reporting of CDBG and home. Whereas CDBG, it's program year, even if the activity is still open. Home, it will only report when the activity is closed for that program year.
Yeah, and I'd like to just add that for CDBG, to make sure if you're reporting the accomplishments for a certain year, to add that year in your accomplishment data, because you can add multiple years. So if it started in 17 and maybe you didn't have any accomplishments until 19, then you want to make sure you add the 19 year in your accomplishment screen so that you can show that happened in 19. Or sometimes activities can remain open for a couple of years and you have accomplishments in both years, like public services or things like that.
Okay, thank you, Susan. Rob, this is a question for you. Do continuous care grantees, CDBG DR, or CV grant funds do a CAPER?
No, they do not necessarily. So disaster grants, if you're receiving a disaster grant, you're reporting through DRGR. And we just mentioned the CARES Act grantees. There will be further reporting guidance for them. And COC grantees use HMIS. So those grantees do not report through the CAPER and through IDIS. Although, as Joel mentioned, anything that's going on in your community that's contributing to those goals you have in your comp plan or action plan can be discussed in a narrative. Find a place, and if you want to highlight that, feel free to do so in the narrative.
All right, thank you. And Joel, one more question for you. If there are multiple versions of the action plan, will this be associated with the last version that was viewed and completed, even if the most recent action plan is still open?
Oh, so this is a good question. There's a little caveat that I can get into here too. So if this is year 2 through 5 of your action plan, of your con plan, so years 2, 3, 4, or 5 of your con plan, as long as you at one point in time had an approved action plan, when you make the CAPER template, it'll associate itself to the latest review completed version of that action plan. So if you have an action plan, say in year 3 of your con plan cycle, you make an amendment and it's still listed as open amendment, and you make a CAPER, that CAPER will associate itself to that latest review completed version of that action plan. I think that's clear, Ben. So then the caveat to all of that is, if this is year 1 of your con plan cycle and you had a review completed con plan and you're amending your con plan, the CAPER template will not create for you. You'll have to actually make sure that even if it's an amendment, the con plan will need to be marked as review completed before a CAPER can be created against it. So that's only relevant if it's year 1 of your action plan. So if you're making a year 1 CAPER, that con plan needs to be review completed, even if it's an amendment.
Okay. Thank you, Joel. And we are coming towards the end of this webinar, but we're going to turn it over to Rob to demonstrate HUD Exchange really quick.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay. So everyone should be able to see the screen here. So this is hudexchange.info. So if we've talked a lot about HUD Exchange. So you go to www.hudexchange.info. You'll need to create an account. You'll see I'm logged in over here. If you're not, I'll have you ability to create an account here. Here's the link if you want to sign up to email updates over here. And ask a question, which we mentioned is under this program support drop-down. And you'll go to here to go to ask a question. And you'll fill out your question there and submit it to us, and then we'll respond to you through the ask a question system. Also, you'll see on these various drop-downs, there's information about program-specific, and also there's a very, click off there. There's a really good robust search feature in the HUD Exchange also. So that's the HUD Exchange that we have been talking about, if you want to go there. Okay, I'll go back to that. So that is all the time. We're actually at 1 after the hour. If your question was unanswered today, please submit it through Ask a Question. And this has been recorded, and the recording and the slides and transcript will be posted in about 2 to 3 weeks. I want to say thanks again to our presenters, Joel Warren and Susan Walsh, Ben Sturm for reading out the questions, and Laura Dietert and Nikki Deininger working behind the scenes. Thanks for the IDIS support and development team, keeping this whole system up and running. And Gloria, thanks for joining us today. Did you have any parting comments for us? I think Gloria may be a victim of the mute button as well. A little bug we're having today, getting people muted, unmuted. Thanks, Gloria, and all the staff at HUD for supporting the work that we do. Good afternoon, everyone. Keep up the good work, and please be well.